is stuffed with local talent. Oh yes. And we're starting off, we'll find out whether this thing works. Oh, it does, kind of. There we go. Here's our man to kick us off this afternoon. And with some of our speakers, I've never met them before, I have to do some work, but with Pete, we go back quite a long way, don't we? Working in the RSPB together over many years, but indeed clashing over the five-a-side football pitch. Who'd have thought that, eh? Who'd have thought I knew one end of a football from another? I think Pete could conclude that I don't. Working with Pete, worked with him at Pulborough, and he then went to work at the Medbury Reserve when Medbury was completed, and he was one of those lucky RSPB members of staff who gets his own office. Do you remember that, Pete? I take these photos in the hope that one day I can use them with its own water supply outside. Now the next bit, I try to make these openers all as accurate as possible, and this, if you think I'm making this up, and I've done some photoshopping, this is just to amaze you rather than amuse you, because the thing that Pete is most famous for across the globe, you'll know what it is. So this is how The Guardian recorded the story that Pete was responsible for. School of sharks spotted off Sussex coast, video as taken by Pete. And you can see some of the fins there. Do people remember this story? This would be back in 2013, 14, probably. 2014. So The Guardian covered it nice and sensibly. School of sharks spotted off Sussex coast. Sky News, shark invasion. Pete's name, Pete's footage everywhere. If we get to the dodo, the truth behind this massive shark party, with the belief that maybe there wasn't some truth behind it. What amazes me most about this shark story, those who are unfamiliar with it, when Medbury was created and Pete became warden, the tide was flowing in and out of this new bay as it never had been previously, and bizarrely, it attracted this shoal of, I think it was spotted smoothhounds was the species, wasn't it? Which is a species that can grow up to about 5 foot in length, but has the typical shark fin. Just to give you an idea that it's not really a frightening shark, its colloquial name is the gummy shark. So you needn't be too afraid of being bitten by one. But it made it, this story, with Pete at the helm of it, made it as far as Australia. And that is their genuine title to this story. I'm hoping that's a happy memory of the point where you went global. You and Taylor Swift, you cut from the same cloth. Ladies and gentlemen, to talk to you about islands, rafts and realignments with Pete's current work in Chichester Harbour. Ladies and gentlemen, Pete Hughes.
The correspondence was something like, you know, yeah, happy to do that talk, love to talk to Sussex Ornithological Society. And Val said, anything else you need? And I said, no. And of course, a couple of weeks later, I realised that Adrian was going to introduce me, and what I should have said is, yes, I need a therapist to get through 6 months of anxiety. And I need a sofa placed here so I can hide behind it whilst I was being introduced. But I think I got away with that pretty lightly. So, I'm glad the fact that Adrian pointed out that the smoothhound story got to Australia, because that's the thing I will take to my grave, that story made it into the Sydney Morning Herald. You know, no one can take that away from me. So, okay. So, moving on from smoothhounds. So, I'm the ecologist for Chichester Harbour Conservancy, and I'm going to talk to you about this kind of stuff. Seabirds, terns, and lots of salt water. And just a quick rundown of the things I'm going to mention in the talk. So I'm going to focus a little bit on the big picture, at least as far as the South Coast is concerned. I'm going to talk about the last 18 months, which is a project that we've been running with, funded by Devon's Green Recovery Fund, called the Return to Turn. We'll talk about rafts quite a bit. Got some cute footage of some terns, you'll be pleased to know. I have a picture, I did have a picture of several fish, now I've actually only got one picture of one fish. It's a good photo, you'll like this. I'm going to tell you how to build an island, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the future, really, and what we can do over the next, well, perhaps a couple of decades, really, and how we can help nesting seabirds in Chichester Harbour and perhaps a wider area. And in all of that, really, you've just got to think about, this is just an excuse for me to do this, you know, show you some trail camera footage of terns. So if you fall asleep during anything else I'm on about, that's fine, but really it's just an excuse to show you some great footage of breeding common terns in particular, and a few little terns as well, which hopefully will keep you all awake after lunch. Okay, so here's the bigger picture. Now, hopefully this isn't too controversial for the Sussex Ornithological Society. With that lot, common terns, little terns, most of this talk will be about common terns, because they've been the species we've had most success with, quite frankly. But there'll be comments around black-headed gulls and Mediterranean gulls as well, perhaps. And within all of that space, so you've got over here, you've got Pagham Harbour, you've got Medbury here, this is Chichester Harbour with Thorney Island right in the middle, and then you've got Langston Harbour over here. And within all of that, that's about, as I calculated it a few days ago, that's about 6,770 hectares of protected designated sites, so mostly special protection area. And I reckon, in all of that space, you've got about 1.5 hectares of viable nesting seabird habitat. So if you don't remember anything else about what I'm about to say, is that we haven't got enough seabird nesting habitat in that area. And the sites we've currently got are South Venice in Langston, Hailing oyster beds just there, a couple of sites in Chichester Harbour, Pilsey Island, States Island, Bowley Island, and then over in Pagham you've got Tern Island. There's a new island now in Pagham Harbour as well, and you've got a few bits of Banking Island in Medbury too, which those are all the spaces where that little assemblage of seabirds nest. So, why do we need it? Yeah, as I've just mentioned, the terns, the gulls, but also ring plovers, oyster catchers, and we just haven't got enough of it. And I'll repeat that probably several times this afternoon. But there's also an interesting assemblage of invertebrates, interesting shingle flora, and most of these sites also double as high tide roosts in the autumn and winter for our waders and other water birds. And this bottom one, yeah, the high tide roost, is something that we work on as well. And what's that habitat look like? So this is Hailing oyster beds, as we call them. Told you it was controversial. And this is a really important site on the Hampshire-Sussex border for nesting black-headed gulls and nesting Mediterranean gulls. And it's also a lagoon that has a couple of tern rafts in it. This is managed by RSPB, extremely productive site for all of those species. So a few hundred pairs of gulls and, well, between 40 and 60 pairs of common terns, something like that annually. This is another Hampshire site. So this is a photo of South Venice. This was taken in 2019. And several thousand pairs of black-headed gulls and several thousand, sometimes, pairs of Mediterranean gulls as well nest here. And this photo is quite interesting from my perspective, because over here is a patch of salt marsh alongside the higher island, and every year several hundred pairs of black gulls nest on the salt marsh there, which is below mean high water, or below mean high water springs. And so they get washed out, they fail. That tells me that there's a dramatic lack of nesting habitat if these gulls constantly nest on inappropriate sites. Straight away you realise that they're not nesting in the right place because there isn't enough in the right place. And similarly, a site in Chichester Harbour, Fowley Island, just south of Emsworth, in 2019, there were 300 pairs of black gulls nesting on that site below mean high water springs. So it all got washed out. So just remind yourself all the time that there just isn't enough space for any of the species. And I know I'm talking about terns primarily today, but the gulls are in exactly the same spot. And the gulls are bigger, aggressive, and tend to nest earlier than most of the terns. And so if there's not enough space, the gulls get there first, and the terns kind of have to get moved off. They get kicked off the end of the bed, if you like. So that's one of the fundamental issues that we face with seabirds nesting on the Solent coast. And I want to talk to you about this site in Chichester Harbour. This will come up a couple of times, I think. This is what we call Stakes Island. 2 photos in June over the last couple of years. And you can see this is essentially the area that survives a high water, normal mean high water. And that's not much. That's the location of it, and this ridge here is what we call Stakes Island in all its glory. Just to give you some sense of ambition of our ancestors, this was a Victorian effort to create tern nesting habitat, obviously, and they decided to build this enormous ridge all the way down here. They were trying to dam off all of the thorny channel and turn it into farmland, but still, it doubled as tern nesting habitat. And what's remnant of that is one of the few places that common terns and little terns still attempt to nest on. And that's the southern end of it on a high tide in June a couple of years ago. Now, I don't know what your definition of an island is, but that isn't my definition of an island. And these concrete culverts, these were put out here in the early 1980s to try and assist with nesting seabirds then. So this is not a new problem, where we are now is pretty critical condition, and clearly not suitable for nesting terns or gulls, even though a few lucky gulls do try and nest in those culverts there annually. So I'm just going to. This is the good bit basically. This is where I get to show you some trail camera footage over the last few years that we've taken. Both on island like Stakes Island and also some of our nesting rafts in a bit, and hopefully this will do its thing. There we go. I've got the volume right. So these are little terns, obviously, and these are nesting where I just showed you, Stakes Island, out in the middle of Chichester Harbour. So that one's sitting on a nest. There is actually another nest down here, just out of camera, off camera, and there's another nest just to the right. So these 3 pairs of little terns were nesting here in 2021. I've got another couple of clips. Now, this is really just to show you some of the issues that little terns face. Sadly, all of these pairs were washed out on a high tide about a week after this video was taken. But aside from the high tide issue, the water, you drinking others? And a black again. So yeah, little terns, they're feisty creatures, beautiful creatures. And I think I've got one more clip of this little nesting site. And this is probably the most fascinating of all of them. So just get your eyes only in on somewhere up here. Tell me what you think this is. So that was a shorted owl that flown into the salt marsh next to the terns, and mid-May, middle of the harbour, as you do, you know, one of the more unexpected features of the trail camera footage we picked up. But yeah, this is the sort of habitat that the little terns are looking for, undisturbed and preferably above the high tide mark. And unfortunately, typically, you know, not enough of this is above the high tide mark. And that is the only fledged little tern I've seen in 6 summers of working in Chichester Harbour. And that bird was fledged off Pilsey Island, which is managed by RSPB. And that was from 2020, I believe. But all of the other nesting attempts from a very, very small number of pairs in Chichester Harbour have failed. And that represents the one fledged little tern chick from that period. And that was again after the original nesting attempts failed due to tidal flooding, and the birds re-nested on Pilsey. So yeah, let's just overview of the problems that nesting terns and other seabirds face. Fairly familiar sort of story. There aren't very many sites. Many of them are exposed to predation either by foxes or competition from guns. There are sites that are really, really good in terms of habitat structure, but they have massive human disturbance, and the most obvious one of those in Chichester Harbour is East Head. So it's a huge site, fantastic habitat for nesting terns, but all summer, every summer, it's completely covered in people. So even though it's within the SPA and it's a site, it's just completely impossible for seabirds to breed. And yeah, many of them also, tidal flooding is an issue, so they're only just above mean high water and therefore covered by spring tide. And going on a bit further down, we haven't got a naturally operating system that creates new islands and new spits, new sites for them to nest on. So we need to kind of design that in. We need to make space for them in the way that we manage our harbours and our estuaries. And I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end. And particularly little terns are suffering from really, really serious productivity issues. And as Ryan was saying earlier with the waders, we need them to be producing sort of at least 0.5 of a chick per pair per year, and preferably something more like 1 to get them going. Such as fencing, massive improvement in nesting success when the sites are protected particularly from foxes. We've seen that in Pagham Harbour. Tern Island in Pagham Harbour is now an absolute factory for sandwich terns in the last couple of years. It's completely and utterly changed the productivity of terns in harbour there. Because the RSPB there have also created quite a bit of extra new habitat, little terns have managed to find space for them there too. So that's fantastic. But fencing is kind of complicated to do, and on tidal sites or nearly tidal sites, it's very complicated. And we can also deploy nesting rafts, which common terns certainly seem to love. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And we can replace some of the lost habitats by designing them really, really well. And Medbury was a great example of that. And there are no doubt opportunities to do this more and more as we realise that some of our coastal habitats need redesigning to accommodate flood risk issues. The big trick is to ensure that when we do realignments, when we redesign our coastline, we have the bird islands, as we sort of colloquially call them, designed in right from the start. And there needs to be an expectation from the DEFRA family, shall we say, that these are things that we have to do. They're not an option, and we have to do them every time we make realignments work. And in all of that, we need to recharge the existing sites with sediment and dredge sediment preferably, and use that better. And obviously the ongoing education issues. So we need to keep talking to people about how we can manage these habitats and how sensitive they are, how prone to disturbance some of the nest sites are. So in about 2018, an organisation called the Sussex Ornithological Society gave Chichester Harbour Conservancy some money, a few thousand quid, and we built the tern rafts. And that really kick-started some of the rest of the work that we're going to talk about this afternoon. So this is the first tern raft, I think, that we floated. Bit of an experiment. I worked in an organisation that didn't have much experience in this kind of work, certainly for breeding seabirds perspective, well, for a long time. So it's a bit of a trial, and it worked really well. So this first year, 9 pairs of common terns nested on it, and they raised 20 young. So that was quite a good thing. And to cut a long story short, this led about 2 years ago to us putting in a bid to the Green Recovery Fund in a partnership with the Friends of Chichester Harbour. And we asked for 180,000 quid from this fund, and they said yes. Then we realised, oh goodness, we've got to get rid of this in 18 months. You know, nothing like a deadline to kickstart work. And we hired a project officer, and a few other things associated with this project, but the key part for this talk is that it was going to supply us with a load of new tern rafts. We were going to buy some kit, allow us to do our own small fish surveys, and importantly, it was going to allow us to spend a good chunk of the money on a shingle recharge of Stakes Island. Now, I suppose I should say that the tern rafts we knew were going to work. We'd got experience there, and we reckoned that the tern rafts were kind of nailed on, really. And the small fish survey was part of the work that we wanted to do around understanding why terns were breeding successfully or why they weren't. The shingle work, the shingle recharge of Stakes Island was definitely quite a big thing. We hadn't really done anything like this before, and we knew this was going to be a big learning curve, but it may be the way that we wanted to work in the future. So, yeah, it was a very important part of it. Now, I think, if I remember my slides correctly, I'm going to talk about fish surveys next. Yeah. I told you I had a good picture of a fish, didn't I? Now, fortunately, Adrian, just before I did this talk, spotted that my slides had thrown out a couple of photos that I was going to explain how you did a fish survey and what you caught. And when I say fish surveys, the sort of fish surveys I do, they're not those. I promise you. They're designed to catch small fish to assess the sort of things that terns eat. And the only fish photo I had on my disc was this. And this is an Atlantic bluefin tuna that washed up just off Thorney Island Sailing Club about 3 years ago. This is the actual fish being collected by Sussex Inshore Fisheries Conservation Authority. 180 kilos of fresh dead tuna washing up in Chichester Harbour. So as a complete aside, if you're out of the channel these days, you may see one of those, unbelievably, so they're becoming much more common. But yeah, the small fish surveys that I do are really designed to look out for juvenile mullet, juvenile bass, sand smelts, sprat, herring, and all of the things that terns, common terns in particular, tend to feed on. And to generalise completely, we don't see that there's a massive food shortage issue. You know, we do see a lot of forage fish within the harbour most years, and we see the response from the terns is actually really, really good. So when they lay eggs, they hatch their eggs, they tend to find enough food. They're generally very successful. So moving on to tern rafts, what do you need for a tern raft? First you need a clone army, as I call them. So we need some decoys. These are common tern decoys that I got off Natural England a few years ago. And these are 3D printed little terns. You know, there's a phrase I bet you never thought you'd hear this afternoon. 3D printed little terns. What a time to be alive and all that. These are part of the kit these days that we use for attracting terns onto rafts and onto nesting sites. And although we did deploy a couple of these this year, we weren't really hoping that little terns were going to use a raft, but we will deploy more of these next summer on another thing that I'll show you in a second. But the tern rafts, so Sussex Ornithological Society gave us money to launch a couple of rafts in 2019. And since then we've expanded it. Last year we had 7 rafts. And we floated them all in the same place in Thorny Deeps. But this is the summary of breeding common terns in Chichester Harbour for about the last 20 years. And as you can see, some years, basically no pairs nested. The blue is the pairs, and the orange is the terns, the youngsters fledged. So in some years, no terns even bred. But usually when they did, they fledged either, well, very, very few young, until you get to 2019, when they start nesting on rafts. And rafts are really successful, really successful for common terns. So the sum total, when you drill down into these numbers a bit more, is pretty incredible. So this column are the young and fledged. And in 4 years, about 130 fledged common terns off the rafts at Thorny Deeps. No predation, no tidal flooding, no human disturbance. Amazing, really, isn't it, what you get? So they seem to be, you know, fledging plenty young. There seems to be plenty of food. So once you take out the issues that we discussed, the tidal flooding and predation, they seem to do really, really well. You'll notice the enormous jump in black-headed gulls since last year, or since between 21 and 22. And that speaks again of the thing I was talking about earlier, where all of the seabirds lack space. There's a massive ball of black-headed gulls looking for somewhere to nest. And as soon as you put a raft out, they will use it. And the key so far has been to deploy the rafts as late as possible. So you deploy them as late as you possibly can to allow the terns to nest after most of the black-headed gulls have decided to nest somewhere else. And that's the great thing about rafts. You can choose where they go and what time you put them out. So these rafts are generally put out first week of May, second week of May. Hopefully the black-headed gulls have already nested somewhere else, but there is still this enormous pool of black-headed gulls that are looking for somewhere. So we will expect to see this number go up, and hopefully this number will still go up, but possibly not as quickly. Okay, so what they're eating, what they look like, this is the interesting bit, and I'm just going to show you a few clips of terns. Okay, so this is a pretty typical food delivery, okay? Blink and you'll miss it, it's great fun. food rides. I did like the little one at the back, just wandering around looking for his food, but it's gone, mate, sorry. So what do they eat? This is probably a sand smelt coming in, and sand smelts, they only get about that big. They're abundant small fish, and yeah, lots of food passes at sand smelt. This is undoubtedly a sea bass. That lateral line tells me it's a bass. I'm not quite sure how that fits into that, but I think it probably did. That is almost certain, well, it's very definitely a pipefish. There's 3-4 species of pipefish in our waters, and that's one of them, going down a very nearly fledged chick. Not very good food, I suspect. Pipefish are mostly just cartilage. This is a little selection of images from a very hot summer day in 2019. This is undoubtedly a bush cricket, as is this. Probably Rozelle's bush cricket, so common terns do eat non-fish items, probably when it's really, really hot, when the bush crickets are flying around or moving around a lot. Yeah. I think it's a bumblebee, but who knows. You do find strange items. And this is what a lot of people will tell you terns eat, but in Chichester Harbour not very much. But this is a sand eel. There we go. and yeah, not this summer, just shows you what's going on really. Black-headed gulls, common terns, all nesting really closely together. So you've got 4 common tern nests there, and 5 black-headed gull nests. The gulls tend to nest, you know, on the edges, and they pile their rubbish up against the corner of the rafts. And the terns tend to go for the middle. So they kind of have an uneasy relationship, shall we say. But so far they seem to work okay together, and both species can occupy the rafts quite successfully. And yeah, lots of common terns and lots of black-headed gulls fledged off these rafts this summer. And again, from all of the trail camera footage that we've got, I've never seen any predation of any of the species, so either the gulls or the terns, by anything else or by each other, which is pretty remarkable. Okay. So, quick recap. This is what you really want. This is basically a timeline of cuteness. Start off with eggs, rapidly achieving full cuteness after a few hours. They retain 100% cuteness for about a fortnight. After about 15 to 18 days, they rapidly become less cute. Sometimes look as though they've been electrocuted or something. I'm quite sure what's happening there. And then around fledging time, around the 21 to 25 day, they sort of recover some of the cuteness and become beautiful again. And this is what you're really after. So nearly fledged common terns. That's the aim for a raft, really. And as I said before, they're incredibly successful over the last 4 summers. And now, so just want to cover some of the things we've been doing over the last few months, really. This is Stakes Island. Remember I talked to you about Stakes Island earlier? This is the site in the middle of Chichester Harbour where the little terns are trying to nest. And we decided, for good or for bad really, to put about 500 tonnes of shingle on this particular site in October of this year. How do you do that? Well, you do it like that. So this is bagged marine shingle. It's been driven to Itchner. It's been picked up by this big vessel called the Walker Warrior, and it's about a 20-minute trip down the harbour. And this is it being craned onto the island this October, first week of October 2022. Yeah, this went incredibly smoothly, considering our inexperience in organising this kind of stuff. Brilliant contractors, and a really great project officer who's working for us, Jess, who organised the vast amount of this. Lots of time getting consents in place from Natural England and from the Marine Management Organisation. Fairly painful, but got there eventually. Planning permission as well. And this sort of operation, very, very technically complex for the contractors to do, is kind of the only way you can recharge islands in this sort of habitat successfully and accurately, and it's really expensive. So, you know, this project costs nearly 100,000 quid, and it's a very, very small area. You know, you don't get a lot of space, but we have spent this year learning how to do it and how we might do it in the future. So, it's a massively valuable project from that perspective. Whether we have terns nesting on it in April and May 2023, you know, this year, I can't say, but we'll find out soon enough. So we're going to decoy this and see if we can't draw terns into nesting on it. And they may do it anyway, but yeah, this has been a really, really fascinating project to be involved in. Can't really not show you a drone shot, can I? This is what it looks like. So they brought the shingling bags onto the island, put the ring of bags around the edge of the area that we wanted it, and then just filled it in the middle, and then took the bags away afterwards. So yeah, hugely interesting project to be involved in. And I should say that Hampshire Wildlife Trust, RSPB, and ourselves, we're all looking at doing more of this, and I know RSPB have got plans afoot to do things in Langston, but we really, really, really need more of this kind of stuff to happen, so that we have, again, more space in more places. And that's what it looks like when you take away all the kit. That's our steamed pudding, as I call it at the moment. This is now quite nicely above mean high water springs. And we hope that a few terns will choose to nest on it in the spring. If they don't, you know, I'm quite accepting of that. It will still be a really important high tide roost. We still need more of those. And we would have learned a great deal in how we do this kind of recharge work. And so the last thing I'm going to talk about before we finish is the kind of the longer term, in the future, what do we do kind of thing, and how we might build more nesting seabird habitat in the future. And I'm currently involved in a project which is looking at potential for realigning the coast of Chichester Harbour on the southwest side of Thorney Island. And that particular project it's been at least 3 years already in the planning, and it probably won't happen, if it does happen, for another 2 years. So you can see how long these particular cakes take to bake. And the Environment Agency, the MOD are the landowners, the Environment Agency are the project managers, and have employed JBA as their main consultants for design and the ground investigations. And potentially that's going to create about 30 hectares of intertidal habitat, but critically it will hopefully also create new nesting habitat for seabirds, and that's the bit that the Environment Agency really need to be persuaded to do, rather than just accepting it's an essential part of the project. And that's quite a battle. So over the next, hopefully over the next 6 to 12 months, we'll know that this project is going ahead, and what the design features in it will incorporate. And just to give you an idea of where I'm talking about, this is Thorney Island in the centre, and that in the red circle is the approximate area of the realignment. So a new seawall would be built inland. The new seawall would be built somewhere along this route, and this being the old seawall, this would be breached, and some of this would be intertidal habitat as a result. And this is a really good opportunity to build nesting islands on the old seawall. But whether this happens, you know, this is quite a long way to go yet. And we need to do this sort of stuff more and more. So we know that a lot of coastal defences are crumbling. We know that quite a lot of the coastal defences are not necessarily protecting areas of huge value. And if we're going to realign the coast, we need to build these habitat features in really carefully, because it's damn expensive, as I've just pointed out, retrofitting or recharging islands after the event. And you know, we really, really need these sorts of habitats to be replaced. And I hope you've all stayed awake. And thank you very much for listening.
Yes.
As global warming is the elephant in the room these days, being coastal habitat, do you take into consideration things like the Department of the Environment's 10-year predictions of flooding along the south coast?
So just to confirm, that question is about global warming and whether predictions are taken into account of sea level rise.
Very much so, yeah. So all of our, the project I mentioned about Thorny Island, we're sort of, the levels we're trying to predict are, let's say, worst case scenario or current predictions plus 10%. So yeah, there's obviously a huge amount of uncertainty as to what the sea level will be in 20 to 50 years' time, but we know that it's not going to be going down. And yeah, there's a lot of modelling out there already, a lot of predictions out there already, and we're trying to ensure that when we get involved in any changes to coastal defences, that's the thing we have to refer to. That, you know, just building higher isn't really, for the sea defence, necessarily going to be particularly cost efficient. We have to ensure that when we do change things, we know that if we're building habitats, they could be inundated within 2 or 3 decades. So yeah, it's all part of the process that we just have to look at this constantly.
Thank you.
Alan, yes, sir.
Presumably the netting around the sides is to prevent seals coming onto the island, or is there other preventative measures you're using for?
So is the netting around the side to prevent seals hauling out, or have you got other measures in place?
So those rafts that I showed you were in Thorny Deep, which is essentially a tidal lagoon between Thorny Great Deep. So the seals can't get into that particular lagoon, and probably in theory they need to squeeze themselves through a culvert. But yeah, so far no seals in there. But yeah, the netting on the sides of rafts is primarily 2 functions. One is to prevent the mating predators from swimming out and then climbing onto the raft, but probably more importantly is to stop the chicks when they get, after about a week or so, or after about 3 days, become really mobile. And tern chicks haven't got a default setting, unlike a lot of seabird chicks. They haven't got a default setting in which they're frightened of cliffs. And I know it's really silly things to say, but guillemots and razorbills and a number of other cliff nesting species, when they hatch out, they know to stand still so they don't fall off the cliff. Terns don't have that off button. And what they do is they just roam around all over the place, because naturally they're on shallow shelving beaches and shingle dune systems and all that kind of stuff. And they actually have quite a high dispersive kind of tendency. And they just walk off. And once they're off the raft, of course, they drown, because there isn't an option for just climbing back on. In natural habitats, they walk down to the low tide mark, and when the tide comes in, they just walk back. But rafts are really risky if they're not shuttered effectively. So, yeah, that's the reason for the netting.
Alan.
Do you have any trouble in securing the rafts in these tidal situations?
So the question is, do you have any problems securing the rafts in these tidal situations?
Yes. So you would have thought no, but the first year we ran rafts. And so, yeah, we had underestimated the amount of weight we needed to moor those rafts with, and yeah, that is a thing. For anyone who owns a boat, this is obviously a continual issue, that what you hang on the end of it to make it stay in the same spot has to be really well thought through and engineered. And yeah, we got that wrong. Soft mud on the bottom of thorny deeps, and the moorings break, there's drag. So, you know, those kinds of stuff, well, we didn't know basically. And we've since then slightly redesigned our mooring systems. I think it's probably the best way of doing that.
Got time for a couple more questions? Yes. So the question is there any thought of colouring in programmes in the future to track the movement of the terns?
Yeah, definitely. So really interested in trying to get a project where we colour in and tag them to see where they go. One of the questions that constantly comes up for us about fish populations, food provision, that kind of stuff, is where the terns forage and how much time they spend in different parts of the harbour, or do they forage outside the harbour. And from a conservation perspective, it's really useful to know what are the key foraging areas so that we can better sort of detect them. And I'd love, you know, that's something that's on a list basically. And being able to tag terms within Chichester Harbour, find out how far they go for food and how often is definitely a big desire to make that happen.
I think there was another question. Yes.
When you with networks, are there scope for creating new islands, extra islands that are terns?
Is there scope for more breeding tern islands in Medmary?
Yeah, I think the fencing thing is, the islands I think are there, and I think the fencing is the next it. That's probably the critical part of that site. So, yeah, I think I'm not involved in Medmary, but I think if there was money to be spent on fencing within that network, Medmary would be very high on the list.
Just like from my perspective, some of the islands that were created in Medmary were there for the long term, so they're designed that as we get sea level rise, there will still be islands at Medmary. So there's some long-term planning there, which, given your core message from all this, is going to become ever more important. Chance for one more question before we break for a little. If anybody's got any? Yes.
Thanks for a great talk. We're hearing a lot about sewage pollution in Chichester Harbour. Have you seen any evidence of that in your fish studies and of course?
Have you seen any evidence of the sewage pollution personally?
Yeah, so water quality in Chichester Harbour is very, very newsworthy. It's a very big deal. Direct sewage pollution on fish surveys, no. But the evidence of pollution within Langston and Chichester, same water body, is sometimes visible. What's really difficult to sort of unpick is what's sewage pollution, what is pollution from algal blooms, from nutrient runoffs and all the rest of it. So I'm generally quite sceptical when I see images of sewage pollution on social media and so on, because it's sometimes not, but it undoubtedly combined sewage overflows, as we call them, where sewage treatment works become overwhelmed by both rainwater and sewage. They're common, you know, they're just standard, have been for a long time, and it's fantastic that they are in the news all the time. But as far as my observation is concerned, it's remarkably rare for me to see it. But I do see the evidence of long-term water quality decline in lots and lots of other ways. And probably the most obvious example of that is if you have a walk around Chichester Harbour or Langston Harbour in, well, it depends from year to year, but it might be March, it might be April, it might be May, and you will see some of that structure will be derived from research provision, and some of it will be derived from long-term agricultural provision as well. So, yeah, but yeah, the water quality things is very high on a lot of people's agenda, rightly so. If you can keep, as an audience, if you can keep that agenda, if you can keep that subject on politicians' agenda high, somewhere high on the list, do so.
That's a good way to end. I think you'll agree, lovely to see the footage, wasn't it, of all the terns. Lovely to think that the sandwiches and then the commons and then the littles are going to be back in within the next, well, the sandwiches within the next 8 weeks, apart from those that are using Chichester all year round these days. And great to know that Chichester Harbour is in safe ecological hands. Hughes. Val has given us, I think, through to 3:10. Is the water available, Val, at the top? Yeah, so there's water available at the back. The stalls are still open. I think we're still selling raffle tickets. Yeah, perfect. Raffle's still going. And on the silent auction, I went and had a look a few minutes before we started back. I think we're up to £75. If you'd like to go and place your silent bid, we'll try and take that higher. And we'll see you back at 3:10.